The Exiled Princess and the Unwanted Guest. The twin moons hung high in the alien sky, casting a cold silver glow over the grand city of Salvaris. The towers stood tall, made of smooth dark metal, reflecting the faint lights of the stars. But inside the grand palace, behind thick stone walls, a princess sat alone. Zyra, the forgotten daughter of the great emperor, stared out from her window. She could see the lights of the city below, hear the faint sounds of music and laughter, but she was not welcome there. Her people did not want her. To them, she was weak, different, a disgrace to the royal bloodline. Her golden eyes, so different from the deep red eyes of her kind, glowed softly in the dim light. She traced patterns on the cold glass of the window, her heart heavy with loneliness. For years, she had lived in this palace, surrounded by luxury but starved of love. And now something new had come to her world. A human. The grand hall of the palace was filled with whispers. The alien nobles stood in tight circles, their eyes filled with distrust and curiosity. At the center of the hall stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark uniform. Captain Daniel Carter, the human diplomat, stood calmly under the heavy gazes of the alien court. He knew they did not want him here. He could feel it in their stiff postures, their unreadable expressions. But he had a job to do. He had come to negotiate peace between humanity and that Salvari Empire. A war had not yet started, but tension was thick like smoke before fire. If something was not done, war would come. The emperor sat on his high throne, his deep red eyes staring at the human with cold amusement. "You are far from home, human," he said, his voice deep and powerful. "I wonder, do your people send you here because they do not care if you return?" The nobles chuckled softly. Daniel did not react. He had dealt with arrogance before. He kept his voice steady. "I am here because I believe peace is possible. Humans and Salvari do not have to be enemies." The emperor leaned forward, his long claws tapping against the armrest of his throne. "Peace? What makes you think we want peace?" Daniel met his gaze. "Because war will cost both our people too much." A heavy silence fell over the room. Some of the nobles looked displeased. Others looked amused. The emperor leaned back again, waving a hand lazily. "We shall see. You will stay as our guest." Daniel knew what that meant. He was not a guest. He was a prisoner with a polite name. Zyra watched from the shadows of a high balcony. She had been told not to come, that the court was no place for her, but she was curious. A human. She had only read about them. Her father and his advisors spoke of them as lesser beings, fragile and emotional. But this one stood tall, his expression strong and fearless. He did not cower before her father like others did. She clutched the edge of the railing. Why did humans seem different? She had read about them. Their stories, their history. Unlike the Salvari, humans were not born into strict roles. They could be weak and still rise. They could fail and still fight. They could be small but still change the fate of empires. She admired that. But no one in her world understood. Suddenly, the human looked up. His sharp blue eyes met hers. Zyra froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel gave the smallest nod, a polite acknowledgement. Zyra turned away quickly, her heart pounding. Later that night, the palace halls were silent. Daniel walked through the dim corridors, his boots echoing softly against the smooth floor. He had been given a luxurious room, but he did not feel safe. He could sense the unspoken threats in the way the guards looked at him. He turned a corner and stopped. The alien princess stood there. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Daniel had seen many Salvari in the court, but she was different. Her golden eyes were softer, her expression uncertain. She was not like the cold, sharp nobles who had watched him like a predator watches prey. Zyra spoke first, her voice quiet but clear. "You are the human." Daniel gave a small smile. "That's what they tell me." She hesitated. Then, "Do you fear my father?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Not really. Should I?" Zyra's lips twitched as if she wanted to smile, but had forgotten how. "Most do." Daniel leaned slightly against the stone wall. "And you? Do you fear him?" Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Then she looked away. "You should leave this place soon, human." Daniel sighed. "I would if they let me." Zyra glanced at him once more, then stepped past him, disappearing into the shadows of the palace. Daniel watched her go, curiosity growing in his mind. She was not like the others. And for some reason, he had a feeling their paths would cross again. The cold winds of the night whispered through the palace walls. The princess was unwanted. The human was unwelcome. And yet, in a place where neither belonged, something had begun. Something no one could stop. A silent bond forms. The night was deep, and the palace lay quiet, but Daniel Carter couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his chamber, looking out at the alien city below. The skyline shimmered under the twin moons, towers of dark metal rising like frozen shadows against the sky. It was beautiful in an eerie way, and yet he felt trapped. The room they had given him was large and richly decorated, but it was still a cage. The doors were locked at night. Guards stood outside. This was not hospitality. It was control. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had been in worse situations. He knew how to wait, how to listen. He had to be patient. If he made one wrong move, if he showed weakness, that Solveri would see him as nothing more than an insect to crush. And then there was her. The princess. Zyra. He hadn't expected to meet her. He hadn't expected her to warn him. There was something different about her. Something hidden behind those golden eyes. A secret. A meeting in the dark. 2 nights passed before they met again. Daniel was being escorted through the palace gardens when he saw her. She stood beneath a tree with long silver leaves that swayed even though there was no wind. The moonlight made her dark skin glow softly. She wasn't supposed to be there. Neither was he. The guards had given him a short walk before locking him away again, but Sarah had slipped past them, unnoticed. He stopped. So did she. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Thyra glanced at the guards in the distance and stepped into the shadows of the tree. She tilted her head slightly, a silent invitation. Daniel hesitated, then followed. They stood facing each other, hidden from prying eyes. "You were watching me," Thyra said, her voice as calm as still water. "You were watching me first," Daniel countered. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. For a long moment, she just studied him, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, she said, "Humans are not welcome here." Daniel shrugged. "I got that impression." Zara folded her arms. "Then why did you come?" "Because I had to," he said simply. "My people need peace. War helps no one." She exhaled, looking away. "Peace is not the way of my people." Daniel frowned. "What about you? Do you believe that?" Zyra didn't answer right away. She looked up at the sky instead, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the moons. "I believe. Things could be different, but my people do not listen to me. They never have." Daniel felt something shift between them. This wasn't just politics. She wasn't just some royal figure locked away in a palace. She was alone. Like him. "You read human books," Daniel said suddenly. Zyra's head snapped toward him. "How do you know that?" "I saw you in the throne room," he said. "You had an old earth book with you. That's not normal, is it?" She hesitated. Then, as if deciding something, she reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small, well-worn book. Daniel blinked. It was a collection of human poetry. "You kept it with you?" he asked, surprised. Zyra ran a finger along the spine of the book. "They took most of my collection. Destroyed it. Said it was weakness." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because it's human. Because it speaks of love, hope, freedom." Daniel shook his head. That's not weakness. Syra looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if trying to see if he meant those words. For the first time in a long time, she felt understood. Danger in the shadows. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Syra's eyes widened. You need to go. Daniel didn't argue. He knew danger when he heard it. Without a word, he turned and walked back toward the main garden path. The guards were returning. Syra watched him go. Then, just before he disappeared into the moonlit garden, she whispered, "Be careful, human. Not everyone here wants you to live." Daniel didn't look back, but he heard her. And he knew this was just the beginning. A silent warning. The next day, something changed. Daniel was being watched more closely. The guards seemed stricter. The nobles spoke in hushed tones when he entered the hall. Even the emperor looked at him differently, as if he suspected something. Someone knew. Someone had seen him with Syra. Daniel wasn't afraid, but he wasn't stupid either. He had made contact with an unexpected ally. But now, there was a target on his back. And if he wasn't careful, it would only be a matter of time before someone tried to remove him permanently. A decision to make. Syra sat alone in her chamber, staring at the poetry book in her hands. She had never met a human before. She had never met anyone like him before. Something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, made her feel seen. As if, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a forgotten shadow in her father's court. But this was dangerous. If her father discovered she had spoken to Daniel, she would be punished. She had been warned before. Showing kindness, showing interest in human culture would only bring shame upon her name. And yet, she had warned him. She had risked herself for him. Why? Syra didn't have an answer. All she knew was that she would do it again. Because, for the first time in her life, she had found someone who understood. And that was worth the risk. Assassination attempt. The palace was never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, faint echoes traveled through the long corridors. Guards pacing in heavy boots, distant murmurs of night attendants, the hum of alien technology buried within the walls. But despite the noise, something felt off. Daniel Carter sensed it the moment he woke up. His instincts, honed by years of dangerous diplomacy and military service, screamed at him to stay alert. The air was too still. The usual guards outside his door weren't speaking. Something was wrong. Slowly, he slid off the bed, his bare feet touching the cold, polished floor. The room was luxurious, designed to impress. But to him, it was just another cage. And tonight, he could feel the bars closing in. Then, a sound. A whisper of movement. Too soft for ordinary guards. Too precise for simple palace staff. Someone was in the room. Shadows in the dark. Daniel didn't hesitate. He rolled off the bed just as a blade sliced through the air where his throat had been. He hit the ground hard, his muscles tensing as he looked up. A figure dressed in black stood over him, their curved blade gleaming under the dim light. Their eyes glowed faintly, a Sci-Fi assassin. So they weren't just watching him anymore. They wanted him dead. Daniel reacted on instinct. His training kicked in as he kicked out, knocking the assassin's knee sideways. They staggered but did not fall. A second attacker emerged from the shadows. Daniel cursed. He was unarmed. He was outnumbered. And the palace was filled with people who wanted him gone. His best chance. Survive long enough to escape. The fight for survival. The first assassin lunged again. But Daniel sidestepped, grabbing the nearest object, a decorative metal plate from a table, and swung it with full force. The impact sent the assassin stumbling back. But the second attacker was faster. A sharp pain flared across Daniel's arm as the blade cut through his sleeve, drawing blood. He gritted his teeth, adrenaline pushing away the pain. He had been in fights before. He had been outnumbered before. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a royal trap, and the walls were closing in. The first assassin recovered and charged again, this time with deadly precision. Daniel had no choice. He dived toward the wall, hit the control panel beside the door, and slammed his fist against it. The security alarm blared to life. Red lights flashed across the walls, and a mechanical voice echoed in an alien language. Intruder alert. The assassins hesitated, just for a moment. It was all Daniel needed. He threw himself at the nearest attacker, grabbing their wrist and twisting it hard. The blade clattered to the floor. Daniel wasted no time. He drove his elbow into the assassin's stomach and sent them crashing into the wall. The second assassin snarled, baring sharp teeth, and prepared for another strike. But then the doors burst open. Guards flooded the room, weapons raised. The assassins hesitated for a second too long. A sharp command rang out through the chaos. Stand down. A dangerous rescue. The guards restrained the assassins with brutal efficiency. The would-be killers fought back, hissing in their alien tongue, but they were outnumbered. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his wounded arm throbbing. His gaze swept across the room, searching for the one voice that had cut through the chaos. Then he saw her. It is Ira. She stood just beyond the guards, her golden eyes wide with something that almost looked like relief. She shouldn't have been here. A royal princess, stepping into a room filled with blood and violence. It was dangerous, reckless, and completely unexpected. But Daniel had a feeling she had come for a reason. She took a step closer, ignoring the disapproving glares of the guards. "You're hurt," she said softly, her eyes flickering to his bleeding arm. Daniel exhaled, a faint smirk forming despite the pain. "You should see the other guys." One of the guards growled. "You should be dead, human." Daniel met his glare. "Yeah, well, someone's going to have to explain why I'm not." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. An assassination attempt inside the palace. This wasn't a random attack. It was a message. Someone in power had ordered Daniel's death. And now, that failure would have consequences. Whispers in the throne room. The next morning, the palace was different. The air was heavier. The halls were quieter. Word had spread. A human had almost been assassinated within the emperor's own walls. It was a stain on the empire's honor. It was a challenge to the throne's authority. Daniel walked through the grand corridors, his arm bandaged, his steps slow but steady. He could feel the eyes of the nobles on him. Some were filled with amusement, others with hatred. Then there were the whispers. The human should not have survived. Someone will try again. The princess interfered. Why? He caught that last one and slowed his steps. The princess, Zyra. She had risked herself by stepping into that room. The nobles had noticed, and in a place like this, drawing attention could be deadly. A choice to make. Daniel found her in the royal garden. She sat beneath the same silver-leaf tree where they had first spoken, her gaze distant, her posture tense. He sat beside her, ignoring the way her breath hitched in surprise. "So," he said casually, "you going to tell me why you helped me?" Zyra didn't look at him. "You think I had a choice? You could have let them kill me." Silence. Then she exhaled, a hint of frustration in her voice. "I should have." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, but you didn't." She turned to him at last, something conflicted in her golden eyes. "If anyone finds out I warned the guards, if my father suspects They already suspect," Daniel cut in. "The nobles are talking." Your name came up. Her expression darkened. For the first time, he saw it clearly. Her fear. Not for herself, but for what this meant. She had crossed a line. And now, there was no going back. Daniel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You don't have to protect me, princess. I've been in danger before." Zyra's gaze flickered with something unreadable. "You don't understand, human. If someone powerful ordered your death, they will not stop. Not until you're gone." Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Guess I'll just have to be hard to kill. Zaira shook her head. You don't get it. If they try again, they won't just come for you. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then whispered. They'll come for me too. The princess' secret. The sky above Salveris burned in hues of deep violet and crimson as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon. The twin moons had yet to rise, leaving the city beneath a strange, twilight glow. But inside the palace walls, there was no peace. Daniel Carter paced his chamber, his mind replaying the events of the past night. A flash of a blade, the rush of adrenaline, the burning pain in his arm. He had survived the assassination attempt, but that wasn't what troubled him the most. It was her words. If they try again, they won't just come for you. They'll come for me too. Zaira had warned him. She had put herself in danger to save him. And now he realized she was part of this tangled mess whether she wanted to be or not. A knock at his door broke his thoughts. Not the sharp, commanding knock of a guard. No, this one was lighter, hesitant. Daniel moved carefully. His door was supposed to be locked. When he opened it, he wasn't surprised. Zaira stood there, cloaked in dark robes, her golden eyes flickering with urgency. Come with me, she whispered. Daniel studied her for a second. Then he stepped forward without hesitation. Through the hidden passages. The palace was a fortress, vast, ancient, and filled with secrets. Daniel had expected Zaira to lead him down the grand halls, past the suspicious eyes of the nobles and guards. But instead, she led him behind a tapestry. The narrow passage was barely wide enough for them to move. Dust swirled in the dim torchlight, and the air smelled of age and forgotten history. Where are we going? Daniel asked as they moved deeper into the hidden corridors. Zaira didn't slow her steps. Somewhere safe. Forgive me if I don't exactly feel reassured, he muttered. She glanced back at him, a ghost of amusement in her eyes. You should be grateful I'm not leading you into another assassination attempt. Daniel smirked. That's still a possibility, isn't it? Zaira didn't answer. Instead, she pushed open a hidden panel, revealing a small, forgotten chamber. Inside, books lined the walls. Human books. Daniel's breath hitched slightly. This is yours. Zaira nodded. My sanctuary. No one comes here. No one knows it exists. Daniel stepped forward, running his fingers along the spines of old Earth novels, history texts, and poetry collections. Why? She sighed, crossing her arms. Because my people do not believe in weakness, and they think kindness, love, human ideals, those are weaknesses. Daniel turned to face her, and you don't. Her golden eyes locked onto his. I used to wonder. But then I saw what my father's ways have done. The wars, the suffering. I realized strength is not in bloodline or power. It's in the choices we make. For the first time, Daniel saw her not as an outcast princess or a political puzzle. He saw her, and he realized something dangerous. Zaira was the only Salveri who wanted peace, and that meant she was a threat to her own empire. The Emperor's warning. The next day, Daniel was summoned. The throne room was darker than usual, the flickering blue flames in the braziers casting eerie shadows. The Emperor sat upon his high seat, expression unreadable. Human. The Emperor said slowly, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. You should be dead. Daniel kept his expression neutral. I get that a lot. A ripple of murmurs spread through the nobles. The Emperor's red eyes narrowed. And yet you live. Why is that? Daniel held his gaze. Because someone stopped it. A pause. A dangerous silence. Then the Emperor's lips curled into a knowing smirk. Indeed. And I wonder, what will it cost them? Daniel stiffened. This wasn't just a threat to him. It was a warning to Zaira. The Emperor knew. And if Daniel didn't act soon, she would pay the price. Escape plans and unspoken truths. That night, Daniel found Syra waiting in the hidden chamber again. "You were right," he said, voice low. "He knows." Syra exhaled. "I thought he might. You need to leave." She frowned. "And go where?" "Anywhere but here." She let out a dry laugh. "Do you think it's that simple? I am a princess of the empire. My blood binds me to this throne, even if I am not wanted." Daniel clenched his fists. "If you stay, they will kill you. Or worse." She met his eyes. "And if I leave, what then? I betray my people. I become an exile." Daniel stepped closer. "You don't belong here, Syra. You know that. You deserve more than this place, more than this cage." For the first time, she looked uncertain. He could see the conflict in her, the war between duty and freedom, between fear and courage. Daniel took a deep breath. "Come with me. Leave this world behind." She swallowed hard. "And go where, Daniel? The humans will never trust me. My people will hunt me." He held her gaze. "You don't have to be alone." The words hung between them. For a moment, she looked like she might say yes. But before she could, the doors to the chamber slammed open. Betrayal and capture. Daniel reacted instantly, grabbing Syra and pulling her behind him. His injured arm protested, but he ignored it. A group of heavily armed guards flooded the room, weapons drawn. Leading them was a figure Daniel recognized, one of the nobles who had watched him closely in the throne room. Syra stiffened beside him. "Vrask," she whispered. Vrask smirked. "You should not have hidden this, princess. You should not have defied your father." Daniel moved subtly, shifting his stance. If they were going to fight, he needed an opening. But Syra grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she whispered. She knew. There were too many. They couldn't win. Vrask's smirk widened. "The human will be dealt with soon. But you, princess, your punishment will be far more interesting." Two guards stepped forward, seizing Syra by the arms. Daniel's chest burned with anger. He wanted to fight, to stop this. But they had already lost. As they dragged Syra away, her golden eyes met his one last time. And in them, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Not fear. Resignation. Like she had always known this moment would come. Betrayal and capture. The walls of the palace had never felt so cold. Syra walked in silence, her wrists bound by energy restraints, the cold glow of their containment field flickering against her dark skin. The guards flanked her on both sides, their expressions unreadable, their grip firm. She didn't struggle. There was no point. She had always known this day would come. For years, she had walked the thin edge between duty and defiance, trying to exist in a world that did not want her. But now, her crime had been seen. She had stepped beyond what was acceptable. She had protected the human. And for that, there would be no mercy. Vrask led the way through the halls, his deep red eyes filled with satisfaction. "You always were a disappointment, princess," he said, his tone light but cruel. "A stain upon the royal bloodline. And now, finally, your father sees the truth." Syra did not answer. She kept her head high, her steps steady. She would not break. Not yet. The throne room judgment. The doors to the throne room loomed ahead, massive and imposing. As they opened, a wave of silence rolled through the gathered nobles. The emperor sat on his high throne, draped in shadows. His expression was unreadable, but Syra could feel the weight of his gaze like a blade against her throat. Daniel was there too. He stood at the far side of the hall, surrounded by guards, his arms bound but his posture defiant. His eyes locked onto hers the moment she entered, sharp and burning with fury. For a split second, she felt something strange. Relief. He was alive. But not for long. The emperor's voice cut through the silence. "You have betrayed your own kind, my daughter." The words were cold, almost empty. Syra met his gaze, refusing to look away. "I have done nothing but seek truth. A murmur rippled through the court. Varosk smirked. Truth. You chose a human over your own blood. Daniel scoffed, his voice loud in the heavy silence. Funny. I don't recall her throwing a knife at my throat. Your assassins did that. The Emperor's eyes flickered to him. You should be grateful they failed. Human. It gives me the pleasure of deciding your fate myself. Daniel clenched his fists. I'm honored. Varosk stepped forward. The princess must be punished. There is no greater disgrace than siding with an enemy of the Empire. Daniel's jaw tightened. You call me an enemy. I came here for peace. Peace is the lie of the weak, the Emperor said smoothly. And weakness is death. Zaira knew what was coming before the words left his lips. The human will be executed at dawn, the Emperor declared. A hushed gasp swept through the room. Not because the nobles were surprised. No, this was expected. But because the Emperor had spoken the words so easily, like Daniel's life meant nothing. Zaira felt something inside her crack. She turned sharply. No. The Emperor's gaze darkened. No. Zaira's heart pounded, but she did not back down. You speak of honor, but there is no honor in killing a man who came here unarmed, seeking peace. The Emperor studied her, and yet you risked everything to save him. Why? The question sent a chill down her spine. Because she didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had too many. Because he was different. Because he understood. Because he was her only friend in a world that never wanted her. Zaira exhaled slowly. Because he is not our enemy. The Emperor's expression didn't change. Then you are. A sharp breath filled her lungs. And just like that, it was done. You are no longer of my bloodline, the Emperor declared. His voice rang out through the chamber, final and absolute. You will be stripped of your title and held as a traitor to the Empire. Daniel's muscles tensed. You can't be serious. A guard struck him across the face before he could finish. Zaira flinched as he stumbled, but he did not fall. Blood dripped from his lip, but his blue eyes burned with rage. Take them both, the Emperor ordered. The guards moved as one. Daniel fought, his muscles straining against his restraints, but there were too many. Zaira did not resist, because she knew the time for fighting was not now. But it would come, and when it did, she would not fight alone. A cage for two. The cell was cold. Dim light flickered from a single overhead fixture, casting long shadows across the stone walls. The hum of energy barriers vibrated through the air, sealing them inside. Daniel sat against the far wall, his breathing heavy. His lip was split, his wrists bruised from the restraints. Zaira stood near the center, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled and heavy. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then finally, Daniel broke the silence. So, I take it this wasn't part of your plan. Zaira let out a small, bitter laugh. No, not exactly. Daniel exhaled. Well, guess that makes two of us. Silence stretched between them again. Then, softer, he asked, why did you do it? She turned to him, frowning. Do what? Stand up for me. His eyes searched hers, waiting for an answer. You could have saved yourself. Zaira hesitated. Could she tell him the truth? That she was tired of being silent, that she had spent her entire life watching cruelty and pretending it did not affect her, that he had given her something no one else had. She looked away. I don't know. Daniel watched her for a long moment. Then he smirked. Liar. She turned back, startled. What? His grin was tired, but real. You know exactly why. You're just not ready to say it yet. Zaira opened her mouth to protest, but stopped. Because he was right. She was not ready. Not yet. The escape plan begins. Time moved differently in a cell. Each second stretched longer. Each breath felt heavier. But Zaira knew one thing. They didn't have much time. The guards would take Daniel at dawn. If they wanted to survive, they had to move before then. Zyra turned to him, her voice low and sharp. "We need to get out of here." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You got a plan?" Zyra's golden eyes burned with quiet defiance. "I do now." And just like that, the first steps of their escape began. Escape in war begins. The prison was silent, save for the steady hum of the energy barriers that lined the walls. Zyra sat against the cold stone, her golden eyes sharp with thought. She had been trained from birth to be obedient, to accept her place as a forgotten daughter of the Empire. But obedience had never saved her, and it would not save Daniel. He sat across from her, his head resting against the wall, his body bruised but unbroken. He had barely slept, but neither had she. The weight of their fate pressed down like a coming storm. Dawn was only hours away. And at dawn, Daniel would die. Unless they did something about it. The first move. Stood. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You come up with something." She nodded. "I need you to trust me." Daniel chuckled dryly. "You did get me thrown in a cell. But sure, let's go with trust." Zyra ignored the comment. She moved to the energy barrier, studying its flickering blue glow. The Solveri prided themselves on technology, on security, but she knew something they did not. No system is perfect. Reaching into her sleeve, she pulled out a thin metal wire. It was small, nearly invisible, but deadly in the right hands. Daniel watched, interested. "I have to ask, where did you even get that?" She smirked. "Do you really think I came to that throne room unprepared?" She pressed the wire against the barrier's control panel, her fingers moving quickly, her mind racing through the code she had memorized long ago. The machine beeped. Then, the barrier flickered out. Daniel pushed off the wall, impressed. "All right, princess, I take back the sarcasm." Zyra turned, her expression serious. "We don't have much time." They slipped into the hallway, moving quickly but carefully. The guards wouldn't expect them to escape. Not yet, but that wouldn't last long. They had to reach the docking bay. Because if they didn't steal a ship now, they were as good as dead. The cost of freedom. They made it through 2 corridors before the alarms blared. Zyra cursed under her breath. They've noticed. Daniel grabbed a discarded weapon from a guard they had taken down earlier. Good. I was getting bored. Heavy boots echoed through the halls. Solveri soldiers rushed toward them, weapons raised. Daniel pulled the trigger. A bright flash of plasma energy erupted from the stolen blaster, hitting the first soldier square in the chest. He collapsed with a sharp grunt, and before his allies could react, Zyra struck. She moved fast, faster than Daniel had expected, using the fallen guard's weapon against his own people. Blaster fire rang through the halls. "Move!" Zyra shouted. They ran, dodging between pillars and metallic beams as shots whizzed past them. The palace was alive now, guards pouring in from all sides. "How far is the docking bay?" Daniel asked, firing another shot. "Too far if we don't move faster," she replied. They turned a corner and stopped just in time to see a dozen soldiers blocking their path. Daniel sighed. Of course. The lead soldier stepped forward, his red eyes gleaming. "Princess Zyra, surrender now, and the Emperor may grant you mercy." Zyra's grip on her weapon tightened. "That's a lie." The soldier smirked. "Yes, but at least I tried." The fight resumed. Daniel and Zyra moved in sync, covering each other as they pushed forward. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and plasma fire. The Solveri were stronger, faster, but Daniel and Zyra were desperate. And desperation could be the most dangerous weapon of all. They fought their way forward, inch by inch. But then, the inevitable happened. A shot grazed Zyra's side, sending her stumbling. Daniel caught her before she fell. "Zyra." She clenched her teeth, breathing hard. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough to slow her down. And they couldn't afford that. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Hold on. We're almost there. They pushed forward again, and just as more guards rounded the corner, boom! An explosion rocked the palace. Smoke filled the air. The ground trembled beneath them. Daniel turned sharply. Tell me that was part of your plan. Thyra blinked. Not exactly. Then she saw the cause. A human battleship descending from the sky. Plasma cannons firing at the palace defenses. Her heart pounded. The humans had come. A war begins. The palace erupted into chaos. The Salveri forces scrambled to respond as the human battleship tore through their outer defenses. Fighter ships launched into the sky, engaging in dogfights with human pilots. The war that Daniel had tried to prevent had just begun. Thyra looked at him, breathless. You called them. Daniel shook his head. No, but they must have figured out something was wrong. The sounds of battle roared above them. The sky lit up with flashes of fire and destruction. They didn't have much time. Sarah grabbed his wrist. Come on. We have one chance to escape. They sprinted through the final stretch of the docking bay, dodging debris and stray gunfire. A sleek fighter ship stood ahead, its engines warming up. Thyra turned to Daniel. Can you fly? He smirked. Princess, I can do a lot of things. They boarded the ship as plasma fire rained down around them. Daniel slid into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. The ship roared to life. Hold on, he shouted. Xira barely had time to strap in before the ship shot forward, blasting through the docking bay doors and into the open sky. The battle stretched out before them, human and Salveri ships locked in deadly combat. Xira stared at the chaos. Her home was burning, and she had chosen to leave it behind. Daniel glanced at her. Where to? She swallowed hard. And then she said the words that sealed her fate forever. Away from here. Daniel nodded. Then let's go. The ship angled upward, leaving the war-torn city behind. As the stars stretched before them, Thyra let out a slow breath. She was no longer a princess. No longer an exile. She was something else entirely. And for the first time in her life, she felt free. The last stand and a new beginning. The cold void of space stretched before them, endless and unforgiving. Thyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her breath still uneven, her mind racing. The planet she had once called home was nothing more than a shrinking sphere behind them, its surface now marred by battle. Ships danced in the sky, locked in deadly combat, human forces against the Salveri Empire. She had always imagined leaving Salveris one day. She just never thought it would be like this. Beside her, Daniel Carter piloted their stolen fighter through the chaos, weaving between streaks of laser fire and flaming wreckage. His hands were steady on the controls, his blue eyes sharp with focus. All right, princess, he muttered, checking the radar. We got two problems. One, your people are very, very angry. Thyra didn't respond. She already knew that. Daniel continued, his tone dark. And two, they're going to chase us until they kill us. Xira exhaled slowly. Then we need to find a way to stop them. Daniel let out a dry laugh. Oh sure, just stop an Empire's war fleet. Easy. She turned to him, her golden eyes burning with determination. We have to. If we don't, this war will destroy both our people. Daniel's smirk faded. He studied her for a moment, then sighed. I really hate how you make sense sometimes. Then a sharp alarm blared. Incoming pursuit. A squad of Salveri warships had broken formation, and they were coming straight for them. Hunted in the void. Thyra tightened her harness as the first barrage of plasma fire streaked past them. Daniel cursed under his breath, rolling the ship hard to the left. The stolen fighter jolted, its shields flaring under the force. Okay, he muttered. Suggestions. Xira scanned the ship's interface. Can we outrun them? Daniel shook his head. Not in this thing. We need a new plan. Thyra's mind raced. They needed an advantage. something unexpected. Then she saw it, a massive human battleship locked in combat with a Salveri dreadnought just ahead. Her heart pounded. "If we get between them," she said quickly, "they'll hesitate to fire. My father's forces won't risk hitting their own flagship." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "That is the dumbest plan I've ever heard." Zyra lifted her chin. "Do you have a better one?" He groaned. "No, which is the worst part." Then he punched the thrusters. The ship dove straight into the crossfire. Between giants, the sheer size of the warships around them made Daniel and Zyra feel like insects caught in a storm. Bright beams of destruction fired between the vessels, lighting up the void. The human battleship, massive and gray, loomed ahead, exchanging heavy cannon fire with its Salveri dreadnought, a beast of dark metal, its crimson lights glowing like an open wound. Daniel twisted the fighter, slipping through a cluster of debris. Behind them, the Salveri pursuit ships hesitated. Zyra's plan was working. For now. Then the comm system crackled to life. A cold, familiar voice filled the cockpit. "Zyra." She stiffened. The Emperor's voice was like a dagger to the spine, calm, powerful, and utterly unforgiving. "You cannot escape who you are," he continued. "This is your last chance. Return now, and you may yet live." Zyra's hands clenched into fists. Daniel's fingers hovered over the controls. "If you're thinking about answering him, don't." She took a slow breath, then pressed the comm. "I was never truly alive under your rule," she said, her voice steady. "I won't go back to being a prisoner." A long silence followed. Then the Emperor spoke one final time. "Then you will die with the human." The turning point. The Salveri fleet opened fire. Not just at the human battleship, at their own people. Zyra's eyes widened in horror. "He's willing to sacrifice them, just to kill me." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Your dad has issues, princess." Explosions erupted all around them. The Salveri dreadnought shields failed under the unexpected betrayal, and the human battleship took the chance to strike, unleashing a devastating counterattack. It was chaos. And then, a transmission from the human fleet. "This is Admiral Ross of the UHS Aegis. Identify yourself, pilot." Daniel's breath caught. This was his chance. He hit the comm. "This is Captain Carter. I have critical intel and a Salveri defector on board. We need immediate extraction." A pause. Then, "Copy that, Carter. We're bringing you in." Hope surged in Zyra's chest. But before they could move, the dreadnought turned its cannons on them. Her father's final order was clear. Kill them before they reach the humans. Daniel's grip tightened. "Hang on, Zyra." Then he did the impossible. He turned the ship around, straight toward the dreadnought. Zyra's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Daniel smirked. "Trust me." He aimed for the weapons core, the one weak point of every Salveri capital ship. "This thing got torpedoes?" he asked. Zyra checked. 2 left. "That's all we need." Daniel fired. The torpedoes hit the core, and the dreadnought erupted in flames. The shockwave sent them spinning, the force rattling their bones. But as the fire cleared, the Salveri fleet hesitated. Their flagship was destroyed. The battle shifted. The humans pushed forward, and the Empire began to fall back. A new beginning. Hours later, the battle was over. Zyra and Daniel sat in a debriefing room on the human battleship, exhaustion pressing heavy on their shoulders. The door opened, and Admiral Ross stepped in. He studied them both, then spoke. "The Salveri fleet is retreating. Your father has lost his hold, princess." Zyra's heart ached, but she did not regret her choice. "Then it's time for something new." The Admiral nodded, then turned to Daniel. "Captain Carter, you disobeyed orders, stole a ship, and nearly got yourself killed." Daniel smirked. "And?" Ross sighed. And you might have just saved the future. Silence stretched between them. Then the Admiral spoke again. The war isn't over. The Solveri are fractured, but they'll regroup. We'll need allies. He turned to Xira. We'll need you. Xira met his gaze. She had spent her life looking for a place where she belonged. Maybe she had just found it. She took a deep breath. Then let's finish what we started. Daniel grinned. That's the spirit, Princess. And as the stars stretched before them, Xira realized she was no longer running from her past. She was choosing her future, and for the first time, she wasn't alone.